So, a recent really intense conflict between India and Pakistan pushed the entire region right to the brink of an all-out war. But you know what's crazy? What happened after the fighting stopped is what really tells the story. So today, we're going to dive into the four most surprising lessons that came out of all that smoke.
Okay, so picture this. It's May of 2025. The world is just glued to their screens, watching as these two nuclear powers get into their most intense military clash of this century. We're talking missile strikes, drone battles, and some pretty fierce dogfights lighting up the skies over South Asia. And yet, after all that fire and fury, analysts came to this, well, really strange conclusion. They said the conflict's final outcome was remarkably unremarkable. And that presents this fascinating paradox, right? How could a crisis that got so close to total war end up, well, changing almost nothing?
That's the big question we're tackling in this explainer, and the answer, well, it tells us a whole lot about what modern warfare, diplomacy, and the fragile stability of that entire region actually look like today.
Okay, so how did this whole thing even get started? Let's begin with the spark that lit the fuse.
It all kicked off with a really tragic terrorist attack in late April. A few weeks later, India hit back with something called Operation Sindoor, launching strikes deep into Pakistan. Pakistan retaliated almost instantly with its own operation, and for 2 straight days, the two sides were just hammering each other, until finally a ceasefire was worked out.
And right away, you get a classic case of the fog of war. I mean, just look at this. Both sides were putting out wildly different stories about the damage they'd inflicted. India claimed over 100 enemy casualties. Pakistan claimed it shot down 5 Indian planes. The battle of narratives was already in full swing. Now, the conflict started in Kashmir, and that brings us straight to our first surprising lesson. The promise of stability there, yeah, it turned out to be a very, very fragile illusion. You might remember this. Back in 2019, New Delhi made a really bold move by revoking Article 370. The official line was that this would finally integrate the region, supercharge its economy, and put an end to decades of violence. And you know what? On the surface, it really looked like it was working. The region saw this impressive GDP growth, a record number of tourists flocked in, they even held elections. There was this genuine sense of optimism that, hey, maybe things were finally turning a corner. But then, boom, the April 22nd attack completely shattered that whole narrative. It was this brutal reminder that despite all the economic gains, the deep-seated political grievances in the region were still simmering right below the surface. That peace was way more fragile than anyone realized. All right, lesson number 2 takes us from the ground up into the sky. This is where a much-hyped clash of high-tech military gear ended in a pretty stunning stalemate. This was the showdown everybody was waiting for. You had India's top-of-the-line French-made Rafale jets going up against Pakistan's new workhorse, the Chinese-made J-10C. Now, on paper, you'd think the Rafale would give India a pretty decisive edge. But then, this number dropped. Pakistan claimed its J-10Cs, armed with these Chinese PL-15 missiles, took down 5 Indian aircraft. And this was the shocker. That number included at least 1 Rafale, the first time one had ever been lost in combat. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about one plane versus another. These dogfights happened beyond visual range. Success depended on the entire kill chain. We're talking radars, command and control systems, the works. It was really a victory for Pakistan's whole integrated system. But here's the twist. Despite those early, kind of embarrassing losses, India ultimately proved it held the strategic upper hand. It showed it could strike high-value military targets deep inside Pakistan, which basically meant it controlled the escalation ladder. It could decide how hot things were going to get. And that brings us to our third lesson, which unfolded miles away from any actual battlefield. You see, even though it was at a military disadvantage, Pakistan somehow managed to score a major reputational win on the world stage. Right from the start, a lot of people in India were just incredibly frustrated. They felt that the international media was skeptical of their claims about Pakistan's role in the terror attack, and that their retaliation was being painted as an act of aggression, not self-defense. And the way it all ended diplomatically was seen as a huge victory for Islamabad. When the U.S. called for a ceasefire, it hyphenated India and Pakistan, essentially treating them as equals in the dispute.
Now, for decades, Pakistan has wanted this kind of third-party mediation, while India has always fought against it.
Okay, finally, our fourth lesson. Let's talk about the money. Because this short 4-day conflict sent massive economic shockwaves, not just through the region, but literally across the entire globe. Just look at this number. The estimated economic cost to India alone for just 4 days of fighting was nearly $89 billion. And that covers everything from disrupted trade to hits on the service sector. It's a truly mind-boggling figure. As you'd expect, the financial markets reacted instantly and, frankly, brutally. Both India's Sensex and Pakistan's KSE stock indexes just took a nosedive as investors completely panicked. Billions in market value just gone. And here's why it quickly became a global problem. India is a massive hub in the world economy. Companies in the US, the UK, and Europe depend heavily on Indian goods, so any disruption over there, it's felt everywhere. And these disruptions were very, very real. We're talking about global supply chains for critical things like pharmaceuticals and cotton getting all choked up. Over 430 flights were canceled. Tourism just dried up overnight. And, in a really serious move, India suspended a key water-sharing treaty, which directly threatened Pakistan's agriculture and its power supply. So that brings us back to our big question. The conflict's strategic result might have been unremarkable. No borders changed, but the lessons? They were profound. It showed us a new era of high-tech stalemates, the absolute power of information warfare, and maybe most importantly, just how fragile our deeply interconnected global economy really is.